This is the Dog Days podcast from UGAsports.com, the podcast where we hear from Georgia Bulldogs about their eras in Athens. I'm your host, Dayne Young. Episode 1 was with Keith Marshall. You can scroll back in your feed to hear from the former UGA running back. This episode features Chris Burnette, offensive lineman for the Dogs from 2009 to 2013. Here he is. Chris Burnette joins us here on the Dog Days podcast. Chris, we appreciate you making time for us. Kind of the first question we ask of our guest is just to tell Dog Nation what you're up to now.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on the podcast. You know, I mentioned to you earlier that it's not often that a has-been like myself gets a request to talk about the glory days, so I appreciate you for that, for sure. And as far as just where I am now, I'm currently living in Atlanta on the west side, in a neighborhood called Riverside, with my wife, who we've now been married for 6 years now. We just celebrated that at the end of May, so super excited about that. And, you know, just working in business development and finance with mergers and acquisitions, just kind of trying to use and put my degree in my mind to use a little bit, and just excited about, you know, where the Lord's trying to take me from there. So that's really the gist of what I've been up to since my time at UGA ended.
You just said a lot of words, finance, merging, things that I know nothing about. So congratulations to you for putting that degree to use.
I appreciate that.
Cool, man. Well, let's kind of take it back. You were telling me that you moved around when you were a kid, but you kind of landed in Troop. So I don't know if you want to start in your youth or if you want to start at Troop, but kind of where did your athletic days begin?
Yeah, man. When it comes to my life in general, I'm an Army brat. So I grew up all around the country, which I think lended myself to just being a little bit more exposed to different things and a little more well-rounded in what I knew and what I saw. I was born in Columbus at Fort Benning and moved from there to Virginia, to New Mexico, to Texas, to Oregon for 3 years, which was super cold. And then from there to landed in LaGrange or Troup County by the time I hit 5th grade, and pretty much lived there from 5th grade all the way to the end of high school, man. And when it comes to athletics, like, it was always at the forefront of my mind, but my parents kind of forced education to the forefront of my mind and made sure that was my main priority. I grew up literally being obsessed with basketball. Like, I remember having a Shaq and a Michael Jordan and an Allen Iverson poster on my walls growing up, and really thinking I would make it to the NBA. But by the time I got to 6th or 7th grade, I realized that, one, I was never going to be 7 feet tall, so that was against me. And 2, I couldn't jump very high, so I needed to have a different alternative. In football, I began playing in the 5th grade when I moved to Georgia, and fell in love with it after a few years of playing, and really felt like I just was groomed by some incredible coaches, incredible men in my time growing up in my youth, and wound up finding the passion for it. And thankfully, you know, Mark Richt found me in 2007, 2008, and, you know, wound up in playing between the hedges as a dream that I never thought I would be able to live out. And, you know, the rest is kind of history from there.
For living around the nation and then coming back to the South, was there a little bit of culture shock almost as a 10-year-old to be thrown back into the South?
Very much so. And most of it, honestly, was just cultural. Even though, you know, me and my family were extremely close and we spent a lot of time with each other, it was a little different adjusting to those different areas. You know, when I lived in Oregon, we were the only, you know, African-American family in the entire town. And it was a little difficult over time, but I think it really taught me how to appreciate different cultures and people from different backgrounds. And moving back to Georgia in the South and being close to, you know, my grandparents, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and, you know, being inundated in a little bit of a different culture. It was different, but it also felt familiar because, you know, my grandparents are all from Macon. All my cousins and stuff live in Macon or in South Carolina or in Atlanta. And, you know, it was different, but I think being exposed to so much just made me who I am today.
And you mentioned you were a basketball fan first, and I see that on your Twitter a lot now. Who was
Yeah.
your team back then? I mean, was it the Kobe Shaq Lakers? Was that your team?
Yes, 100%, 100%. Like, I literally thought that I was Shaq growing up. You know, my my grandma, she used to call me Baby Shaq as a kid because we favored each other when I was a child, and I really wanted to be him so much. And that was always the team I rooted for. And living out on the West Coast, you know, most of the games that I saw were, you know, Lakers games because those are the ones that were on TV more times than not. So I've always been a huge Kobe and Shaq fan, and now that I'm living in Atlanta, I've kind of transitioned to being a Hawks fan. So
That's a good time to be a Hawks fan. They're exciting right now.
yeah, very much so. I'm excited to see, you know, how the young crop of guys they have now kind of mesh and gel together, and just praying that I can get some season tickets before they skyrocket too much, you know.
Somebody listening with a hookup, just get a hold of Chris. Get him some season tickets. We need to make that happen.
Exactly. I appreciate that plug.
So you get back into Georgia. Were you a Georgia football fan? Did that have to develop during your middle school years? Because for people that don't know, Troup County is kind of unique in the sense that it's closer to Auburn's campus than it is
100%.
UGA's campus. And then by the time that you got to be recruited in high school, I'm assuming a lot of the Alabama flags came out because Nick Saban was beginning to turn them around.
Yeah. You're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. Like Auburn growing up, I would say probably 85% of my teachers, administrators, coaches went to Auburn or were Auburn fans because we were right there on the border. But as I mentioned, you know, my dad and my mom being from Macon, my dad was a huge Georgia fan. And I got into football in 2002, which was the perfect timing because that's when, you know, the Dogs won that SEC championship, their first one with Coach Rick. So seeing that level of success and seeing those guys be so it was so much about it that just appealed to me. Just seeing the physicality, the camaraderie. I kind of loved seeing just the way that all came together and seeing how passionate my dad and my older brother, who's 5 years older than me, were about the Dogs. It just kind of nurtured that love. And then as any kid did, I played a lot of video games and I played a lot of NCAA football and, you know, just kind of fantasizing and putting myself on those teams as a kid. It really just allowed that love and that passion to grow over time. And by the time I was 16, if Georgia would have offered me a gray shirt, I probably would have still went because I cared that much about the Dogs and wanted to play that much between the hedges.
But nobody makes themselves as an offensive lineman on the NCAA. So what position did you make yourself?
You're exactly right. You know, at that time I played defensive line. And I thought I was going to be Julius Peppers. So I would make me as a DN. I would be like 6'6", you know, 290 and ran like a 4.3 on the game. So it was definitely fantasy land, but it put that dream out there in front of me and made me believe it was possible. So I really enjoyed those years of, you know, kind of playing through it. And I actually got to know a lot of the players, at least their names and stuff, just from, and their numbers and their positions and their stats and stuff just from playing the video game.
So who was your primary recruiter from UGA?
Primarily, it was Rodney Gardner at the beginning, and then it kind of transitioned over to Coach Cyril's over time. You know, I went to a few camps after my freshman and my sophomore year, and I was primarily trying to get recruited as a D lineman at that time. And I think I was I think I was an above average defensive lineman, but kind of made that full blown transition to O-line my sophomore year, and that's when the exposure started to come, and that's when Coach Gardner started coming to practices and coming to games and stuff, and then obviously, like I said, transitioned to Coach Cyril's, and just built some really good relationships with them over time.
Man, Rodney Gardner, he's dynamic. He knows how to speak to people.
He does. He came in to our living room, and, you know, he won my parents over from the beginning. I don't think it was super difficult, you know, with us having the Georgia flag flying out on our front porch. But he was incredible. I really built a good relationship with him, and a lot of that, you know, carried over in my time when I was actually playing there on the team.
Do you think that other schools that were trying to recruit you, when they came in and they saw some of the Georgia things, did they kind of see that as an uphill battle as well?
Oh, for sure. And to be completely honest with you, none of those teams actually even made it to my house. That's how that's how passionate I was about UGA. I'll never forget Urban Meyer when he was at UF, when he was at Florida, came to my school, and my coach, he called me out of class, and I remember telling him, like, I don't really have much to say to him, so I don't think he should have wasted his time coming down here. And looking back, it was probably pretty arrogant, and I feel bad about it because I didn't really give any teams or schools the time of day other than Stanford coming out of high school. But, I'm sure that they all knew my passion for Georgia because I made it pretty candid. And I'm sure that they saw that as an uphill battle and tried to just kind of sow some seeds where they could. But I think Georgia had the inroads, from the very beginning.
Man, if you're ignoring Urban Meyer at your high school, you just won over Georgia fans all over again. I promise you that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy looking back because, Nick Saban had just kind of gotten to Alabama from being with the Dolphins when I was getting recruited. And I remember him coming to my high school and coming at our gym, and I'm playing basketball. And I remember speaking to him, and, he didn't have the same aura that he does now, but even then, I just was like, you're great, but you're no Mark Richt. So it's kind of crazy looking back on it, though.
Well, and one of the things that you've told me that, and really anyone that remembers your Georgia days is important to you is your faith. And obviously that's something that Mark Richt instilled personally, but also just that, that's something that he valued as a leader in his program. So is that a connection that really sold you even more beyond just the family connection to the G?
100%. If there would have been another coach that was on the staff, I'm sure I probably still would have wound up at Georgia. But like I said, I got exposed to UGA football in 2002, and that was the very beginning of Coach Richt and his run of just, 10 wins, winning the SEC, winning the East, and seeing what he garnered not only in respect as a football coach, but in respect as a man and as a man of faith. I wanted to be exposed to that man as much as I could in order for myself to grow as a man and as a football player, but also as a person of faith. So when he was the one coming to my home and having conversations, I knew I could believe him. I knew I could trust him. I heard so many things from people who had no vested interest in whether I went there or not, saying the exact same things about his character and who he was. And he proved to show that to be true, in my 5 years when I was at Georgia.
It makes it hard to negatively recruit against someone like that that's so respected in the industry.
For sure, 100%.
And, you've mentioned that 2002 year. It's interesting when you say that you see that build and you kind of get the excitement and you want to be a part of that, because I would imagine that the current UGA team will only see the ramifications of their national championship run in the upcoming years with all these current recruits that are trying to get there. I think a lot of people forget how that builds for current recruits.
So much. Like it's incredible how that just creates a snowball effect, because as much as I was exposed and loved Georgia as a kid, it really became more important and full to me when there was potential for me to go there and I was a recruit. And that was around the 2007, 2008 years when Georgia was, again, kind of at the top of the crop. And, with Noshawn Marino and Matthew Stafford and Muhammad Massaquoi and all those guys just being incredible and seeing them do everything that I wanted to do, which was, be in competition to win the East and to win the SEC and, beating Hawaii. I remember them coming out with the black jerseys and beating Hawaii being like a defining moment in my whole recruiting process of like, I cannot go anywhere else. Like if they are to give me an offer, I have to go there. And, like you said, it's hard for, I think, the fans to realize the impact and the ramifications that those moments have.
So you get on campus. This is 2009, right?
Yes.
Did you enroll early, or were you a summertime enrollee?
No, I actually was scheduled to enroll early. It was supposed to be me, Dallas, and Aaron. And I was actually in the running to be valedictorian of my high school. And for whatever reason, they had a rule that if I were to leave early, that I would basically forfeit that opportunity. So I decided to stay for my spring semester in high school and, wind up hopping on the campus by the time I think it was late May, early June came around.
I would say that was probably a wise decision if you were in the running academically for that. And it worked out well for you anyway because you redshirted your first year. So,
Exactly. Yep.
One question I had was that based on how you moved around as a kid, do you think that you acclimated to college life kind of away from home maybe a little bit better than some people that didn't have some of those kind of experiences?
Maybe. I think depending on the perspective, I think you could say so. If you're looking at just from being able to kind of ingratiate myself with the different guys from different backgrounds, I think it definitely did help. And also, like you said, being in different situations, I think it allowed me to be a little bit more independent early on. But I did struggle just as a man in general because even though I didn't grow up in church, I had kind of really, even though I was exposed to things of God growing up, I didn't really come to saving faith until I was 17, right before I got to UGA. And I think I spent that first year kind of in a shell a little bit. Like I wanted to only focus on, my faith, my schoolwork, and on, trying to get on the field. And I think I could have done a little bit better job of building relationships that first year. But I think after that, I kind of broke out of that shell a little bit and started getting more close with my teammates and with other students that I was in class with. And I think that's honestly what wound up allowing me to have a successful tenure at Georgia, was not allowing myself to be insulated, but allowing myself to be exposed and open to other people.
I think compared to most people that get on UGA's campus for the first time, you'd rather be on that side of it than be on the side that you have to reel yourself back in.
Yeah, this is true. That's a good point.
So you redshirt that year. Georgia goes 8-5.
Yep.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily a disappointing season, but it got worse after that. I mean, 2010, you get a little bit of playing time. Georgia goes 6-6. There was just that bowl game in Memphis.
It was rough.
Yeah. And after that game especially was kind of the first wave of the fan base at least appearing divided about the leadership at the program. From a player's perspective, just how did that affect you guys?
Man, 2010 was a tough year, and up until that point, it was the toughest year of my life. I went into that season really anticipating not just playing, but starting multiple games. And, going into that first game of the year, I was kind of slotted to being that sixth or seventh guy to kind of get into the rotation. And they even had packages of me playing fullback, and I wound up getting a concussion at the end of camp, and that knocked me out for 2 weeks. And then right after that, I came back and dislocated my patella before the third game. I think it was South Carolina or something like that. I can't remember. And basically just being devastated, from a personal aspect, but then doubling down on that and seeing how bad we were doing as a team. I know we had that stint where we had lost to Colorado, and I think it was Mississippi State, and it was just a fracture, not only I'd say in the fan base, but even on the team, of where we headed from here. And that season, I think it built a lot of character, and I think it revealed a lot as far as leaders on the team, because that following year, it showed us who was for us and who was for themselves. And it was a tough year. I remember recalling thinking that, Mark Richt could be gone, and anticipating what I would do personally, like whether I would continue at Georgia or whether I would transfer somewhere else, like maybe to Auburn or to Stanford or Alabama or something. But that was a very difficult year, and from a personal and from a team perspective. But I think that year was needed to kind of help us be refined and become a better team the following 2 and 3 years.
So who were the leaders on that team that kind of ushered it through that? Because, the quarterback, Aaron Murray, was a freshman, and maybe he had the leadership qualities. I'm not going to answer that for you, but it just, that's at least a lot to ask of a freshman.
Man, it's crazy you say that, because he was a freshman and he was 19, but Aaron was really the biggest catalyst in changing the perspective. He was my roommate my freshman year. I love Aaron, super tight with him to this day. He was in my wedding, and he was the guy who said, one, I'm not used to losing. He went to Plant High School, and they're used to winning and competing and winning state championships, and he did not allow us to feel sorry for ourselves. And not only him, but Ben Jones really took the reins and had the same attitude. He's like, I don't care how difficult this gets. I don't care how many games we lose. We're not going to quit. And we're going to take each and every lump that we get and build on it, And it was tough to do that because we had so much NFL talent on that team, and we were still struggling mightily. But he had the mindset of we're not going to allow this to be our defining moment, and he did not want that to be the definition of his entire career and his time at Georgia. So I would say Aaron Murray and Ben Jones were the two main catalysts of us kind of getting the ship back together the following year.
And then if there was that divisiveness on the team just about the uncertainty of leadership after you have a 6-6 season, what did the coaching staff do in that season between 2010 and 2011 to kind of regain the confidence of the team?
Honestly, I don't even know. I think that overall we never lost faith in our coaching staff. I think we always knew that we had good coaches. We just weren't executing properly, and we weren't all on the one accord. So I think the thing that they did do that I will give them credit for is putting even more on us as a team and saying, you know what, if we're a coach-led team, we're always going to fail. But if we're a player-led team, we're going to be able to rally around each other. We're going to hold each other accountable, and we'll be able to grow from that. And, Coach Rick, Coach Bobo, Coach Friend when he came in, also Coach Grantham on the defensive side and all of his, defensive coaches, I think just tried to rally around the idea of if we're the leaders of this team, we will fail. But if the players are the leaders of this team, we will succeed. And I think that resonated a lot with us, that following season.
And it did, but maybe not initially because the first two games of that 11 season. First of all, I just got to ask, what was the team's opinion of the uniforms of the Boise State game, the Power Ranger uniforms?
Man, that's hilarious because I'll never forget the day when they announced that we were getting the jerseys. We were in the meeting room, and Coach Rick was like, hey, we got a surprise for you guys. And Brandon Boykin and Ben Jones come busting through the door, and they have on the Pro Combat uniforms. Everyone is going crazy. We're throwing water bottles around. We're hyped. We're excited. We're like, man, we finally got something that's outside of the norm, because we had all kind of been groomed to seeing the black jerseys and wanting those. So, and we had none of us who were in that at least 09 class had been able to wear them. So it was exciting. And by the time we got to the actual game and we got those uniforms up close and personal, I think the opinion changed a little bit. And we were like, these look kind of cool the first time, but I'm not so sure about them now. Because looking back, we really did look like Power Rangers out there. But looking back, I'm glad we at least got that opportunity to try something new. I'm sure that the boosters and the fans hated them too. But I'm just glad I was a part of that because it was actually my first game I actually ever played for Georgia was when we wore those Pro Combat uniforms. So,
well, I'm glad the wardrobe improved from there for you.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
That game in particular was interesting because the offensive line was tasked with paving the way for Isaiah Crowell after such an offseason of hype. And obviously he's proven what a talent he is by his NFL career. What's it like to have a freshman? I guess this was back-to-back years with Murray being a freshman and then Crowell coming in, just having that hype around an offense.
Man, we didn't pay too much attention to the hype. I think we all realized after you've been in college for a few years that the stars and the recruiting services rankings don't really matter. If the guy doesn't get there and doesn't show improve. But Isaiah, like you said, was extremely talented. We knew that we had a young core in our backfield that could just make a huge difference and impact in where we wanted to go. Unfortunately, like you said, we didn't start off on the best foot, losing to Boise State and then ultimately losing to South Carolina because Jadeveon Clowney was, a freak of nature. But I think over time, we just started to realize, like, no one player, no one man is going to make this thing run. And it took for all of us to be on one accord and on one page because, Isaiah wound up getting hurt in the middle of the year, and we kind of did it by committee after that. And I think us having that mindset allowed us to go on that 10-game winning streak in the middle of that season.
Did you ever have a one-on-one matchup with Jadeveon Clowney?
It's funny. In the 3 years that I played South Carolina, I lined up against Jadeveon Clowney twice. One of those was on PAT field goal, and that's simple. That's easy. All I have to do is make a step, put my hand out. He's not going hard anyway. And the other time, it was he was lined up. He was playing the 3 technique. We were in a 5-man protection, so there was no help. There was no chipping. There was no nothing. And it was just me and him one-on-one. And I remember I had my hand in the dirt. I was scared to death because I knew that he was going to come with some kind of speed to power move. And, that speed at times it can throw you off. And I was prepared. I was down in my stance. I was ready to go. And then Coach Bobo calls a timeout. And I remember never being more happy and excited that we called a timeout in my entire life because I was scared to death and he was going to do something crazy against me. And that's weird because I'm never normally the guy to get intimidated at all. But I just had seen what he had done to us in multiple games, over the years. So it was good to kind of get him out of the way. And he wound up moving back to the defensive end spot when we came back from timeout. So I was happy about that.
One of the games that I covered in local TV, it was at South Carolina Stadium. I saw him come around the edge. It was a draw play. I think Todd really got the ball. And Clowney kind of overran it because he was that big and fast. And so he was in the process of falling. I saw him push himself off of the ground with one arm and in the same motion lunge forward to grab Todd Gurley before he got to the line of scrimmage. It was the craziest athletic play I've ever seen. And so, God bless you if you were the one down there in front of him.
I left blocking Clowney to my guy, Canarius Gates and Mark Beard and John Theus and those dudes. I was like, y'all handle him. I'll handle, some of the bigger, slower guys around here.
So in 11, the team loses to Boise State and South Carolina, but then reels off 10 straight. And like you said, it was really a team coming together, especially offensively, and doing it in a variety of ways, leading to the SEC championship game, which was, that was a disappointment because LSU just had Georgia's number that day.
Yeah. Man, that was such a difficult game. Like, looking back, going into it, we were extremely confident. No one gave us a chance. Everyone was like, LSU this year is a juggernaut. They had Honey Badger and everybody else that you could name on that squad. But going into it, we really believed we could win that game. And I think we had a few missed opportunities in that first half to kind of take a commanding lead of the game. And I know we were up by the time we went into halftime, but they were just so deep, man. By the time we went into halftime and got our chance to kind of regroup and drink our Gatorade and eat our peanut butter and jelly and whatever we did at halftime, I remember looking over to Ben Jones and being like, man, it feels like we just played an entire game plus overtime, and we have a whole second half left to play. And I thought it was just me, but he was like, bro, I feel the exact same way. And we went out in that second half, and I think it was just a game of attrition. And they wound up making plays in special teams and on offense, and they kind of figured us out defensively as well. And it sucks because I think we had a good game plan, and I think that we were ready to execute it. And I think that we did in certain instances. We just let a few opportunities slip through our grasp. But looking back, I think that kind of set the stage for our confidence, going into the following season, where we felt like we could really hang in that game.
Well, and it did come in handy the following season. The first test of that 12 season was Missouri's first game in the SEC, and I was asking Keith Marshall about this, and he was just saying that that you guys knew about the comments about Georgia played old man football and all that stuff, but that you really didn't pay attention to it. It's just Georgia was clicking on all cylinders by that point.
Man, look, it's crazy. Keith might not have been paying attention to it, but I was paying attention to it like severely. I can't. Who was it who said those comments? I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it was one of their defensive linemen.
I think it was Sheldon Richardson. I
Yeah.
believe. I think that's who it was.
It was. You're correct.
Yeah. So I remember after I played the first game against Buffalo, I actually cracked my sternum and broke my rib cage in 3 different places, and that kind of got me out of that game. And I remember hearing those comments about the way that we play and saying we played old man football, probably within hours of me getting that diagnosis that I had cracked my rib cage and my sternum. And I knew going into that game that Sheldon would be lined up right in front of me. I knew that he would be the 3 technique and the shade and the nose and the 2 that lined up in front of me for the entire game. So I'm like, man, he brought these comments to light. They became, paperclip. They became basically newspaper, material, bulletin board material. And I knew everyone would be focused on him and what he did in that game. And I'm like, well, that's just perfect. I'm coming off a broken rib cage and a sternum, so I may not be to my fullest ability. So that entire week, I tried to study everything that he did, every tendency he had. I watched film from when we were actually in high school, trying to get a better idea of what he was going to bring to the table. And my main goal for that game was to make sure he did not make any big plays. And thankfully he didn't. But it was definitely a test. Like, that team came in being fresh into the SEC. They brought it. Like, they brought a lot of intensity. I think Missouri being there in a night game, that was special as well. Thankfully, Jarvis, kind of saved the day for us. But I will say that I was proud that with all of that, hoopla that he generated and him being, an all-pro guy in the NFL now and, being Pro Bowl a few times as well, I really felt like I handled my own against that guy that night.
Man, if you were watching high school tape of him leading up to that week, you were obsessed with stopping him.
Yeah, I was. I could not. I just knew I could not allow myself to get embarrassed because I saw the tape from him his freshman year, and he didn't look the same. I think he lost maybe 30, 40 pounds going from his freshman year to that following. I mean, not his freshman year, his sophomore year to his junior year, and I was like, let me see him not only currently today, but also at his best, because we only had 1 game of tape, really, of him playing at his full bore speed. So, I was pretty obsessed with it.
So a couple weeks later, it's not necessarily a notable game because Georgia won in a blowout. It was the Vanderbilt game. But do you know why I'm asking you about it?
Yes, I do. I do. Probably because I proposed the next day. Is that right?
In a very public way, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me the story about that, because I'm imagining if you're playing on the field against Vandy and the second half, you start to get some reserves in. Man, I'm sure the butterflies had to start coming up.
Yes. You hit the nail on the head. So I knew that I was going to propose to my wife within, I would say, 6 months of me even knowing her. I knew that we weren't even dating at that time. We were just friends. But I knew that if she would, if I would luck up somehow, if I would deceive her enough to thinking I was a good guy, and when we would start dating, I knew that was the woman I wanted to marry. And it's crazy because over the next 2.5 years, 2.5, 3 years, most of my teammates knew the same thing. They knew that she was the one I wanted to be with long term, and that us getting engaged and eventually getting married was going to happen. So I remember telling everybody, like, hey, like, I'm proposing at church, at Athens Church. Me and Pastor Sean C., like, we kind of cooked up this plan, and I think it's going to be great. I just recorded this video, so y'all all got to be there to support. I would love for y'all to be there. And I'll never forget going into the offensive line meeting room, and Coach Friend, he heard us talking about it, or he probably had just heard it through the grapevine, and he's like, man, you're telling everybody to show up to your proposal. You better be sure that she's going to say yes. And that was on and that was on a Thursday, and I remember him saying that and being like, oh crap, like, he's right. Like, if she says no and I'm doing it on this big stage, like, that would be the most embarrassing moment of my life. But thank God she didn't embarrass me. She did say yes. But like you said, once we were able to get the second string guys into the game, that's when the butterflies really began to set in, because I knew what I was going to do. the boys knew what I was going to do, and they were all kind of ribbing me about it. Like, man, like, you had the game today, but you got the big game tomorrow. So it was really fun. It was an exciting moment, just looking back on that and seeing the support that I had from the guys that I love so much, and thank God that she said yes, and thank God that she said yes when we got to the altar, and thank God she's still saying yes every day for the past 6 years, because she's the best thing that ever happened to me for sure.
So after that Vanderbilt game is when the big offensive lineman became quite the softie for a few hours at least.
Exactly, man. You're exactly right.
Man, that's an awesome story. So that season, it seems to be going well. South Carolina again.
Yeah.
35.
Per usual, huh?
Yeah, Keith told me that for that particular game, it just seemed like nothing was going right, but still there was the confidence, and all of a sudden you're in the second half, and you're like, man, we're down 28-0. It's the fourth quarter. Right,
man. It happened so fast. Looking back, it's crazy because I actually played an incredible game that game, which is kind of crazy. Like, I think I graded out like probably the top 3%, like 91% that I ever did in any game, and it just seemed like everything around me was just chaos. And I had a feeling that it was going to play out that way, just seeing how the crowd was rocking the stadium and the energy that they brought. And I'll never forget, I can't remember who they were throwing the pass to. It might have been Alshon Jeffrey. I can't remember. And I remember Bakari Rambo came over and laid out a huge hit on the guy, and they still caught the ball. It's like a 30, 40, 50-yard play. And just seeing the stadium erupt, and then being like, okay, like, that's nothing we haven't seen before. We know we can do our thing on offense. And within the first series, I think it was within the first 4 or 5 plays, Jadeveon came around the corner, hit Aaron pretty smack dab, and the ball just kind of flew up in the air. And I remember turning around after hearing that hit and looking Aaron dead in the eyes. And it's never good when an offensive lineman is looking at his quarterback in the eyes in the middle of a play, and not knowing where the ball is, and kind of after that, just feeling like we just were not in a good space moving forward, and it sucked. Like, the momentum, everything went right for them, and everything went wrong for us that game. But I think it really harkened back to that previous year and the adversity that we had seen, and showing, you know what? We're always going to go through hurdles. We're always going to have, adversity and trials that we have to face. But the thing that defines us is how we respond to that. And we knew that all our goals were potentially still on the table. As long as somebody beat South Carolina, we knew we'd have an opportunity to still get into the SEC championship, win the East, and hopefully get a chance to win the Natty as well. So that was definitely a defining moment. It just sucks that we couldn't look back on that moment and say, man, that's what propelled us to win the national championship that year. But, it was pretty special what we were able to accomplish that season with all things considered, for sure.
Along the way, Sean Williams gives a pretty famous team speech. Were you in the room, or what do you remember of it?
Yeah, I was in the room. And, Sean, it's crazy because when we came in together in 2009, Sean was one of the most quiet guys on the team. But I think his steadiness and his consistency, and not only the way he prepared, but the way he carried himself, just lended him to garnering a lot of respect from the guys. And, the speech that he gave, I don't remember a lot of the specifics, but I just remember the passion that he had, and the fact that he felt like it was not over. And I think we all remembered that and bought into that as well, and said, this is just one trial, and this is one stepping stone that we'll have to go through, in order to get to our ultimate goal at the end of the day, which was trying to get to the national championship.
Well, you get to Atlanta, have a lead. It's the story with Georgia and Alabama in recent years.
But deja vu, huh?
But even then, Aaron Murray, Arthur Lynch, you guys on the offense, it seems like that the story is going to come around to be a good ending, that you're going to get to go face Notre Dame, likely giving them the same beating that Alabama did.
Right.
Take me back to that final drive, because I think there's a lot of Georgia fans that could recite every single play of it.
Yeah, I don't know if I could recite every single play, but I do know that I've replayed that series and at least that last segment of that series in my head probably 1,000 times. The thing that I remember vividly was just Aaron, making the big play, and us having that big pass play and getting down to the 5-yard line, and just looking over to Boston, kind of all of us being on the same page of, hey, we need to sprint, get down to the line, get ready, and whatever they call, we're going to run it. And initially, I made eye contact with Boss. You know, both of us were really imperative in making calls with the line, and along with Aaron, clearly, because he was the one who orchestrated everything, but we helped kind of facilitate some of that as well. And I remember both me and Boss making the spiking symbol. Like, hey, we're spiking the ball. We talked about this already. We know what we got to do. Let's get up to the line. Let's get set. Let's spike it. And let's get 2, maybe 3 plays right here at the 5-yard line. And I'll never forget being on the same page with Boss, both of us doing the spike symbol. And I shifted my gaze over to the left a little bit to Aaron, expecting him to be imitating the same thing. And he wasn't doing it. He was looking over to the sideline. And I remember being like, wait, what is he doing? Like, why is he – maybe he's just kind of letting me and Boss take the lead on this, but whatever, we need to go ahead and get lined up. And I remember we put our hands down, got our hands in the dirt. For some reason, Aaron wasn't telling us spike. He just said, get down. And I remember us kind of waiting, looking around, waiting on the call and what the play might have been. The call never came. There was no protection that was called out. We basically were just kind of there. And then me and Boss at the very last second before Aaron says hike, we were like, hey, just islands, block the guy in front of you. Like, just every man for himself. We'll figure it out. And when we snapped the ball, I remember really not even blocking, honestly. I think everyone was so exasperated. We just kind of were more looking than anything. Like, I remember touching the D lineman, and he was kind of just looking. He wasn't really rushing the passer. And seeing the ball come out and seeing, you know, Clowney open with a opportunity to potentially get to the end zone, but not knowing that C.J. Mosley had tipped the ball and, you know, Clowney catching it and ultimately falling to the ground. I just never forget how when he ultimately did fall, I looked up at the clock and saw that there were still 3 seconds left. And it felt like that clock stayed on 3 seconds for an eternity. Like it just sat there. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, we might still actually have another chance to get another playoff. And then after what seemed like 16 hours, it went from 3 to 2. And I knew that we just didn't have a chance or enough time to get another playoff, and just dropping my head down and being like, I can't believe that this just happened. And I will never forget being in that moment and being so close to everything that we had worked for from 2009 through all the way to that moment, you know, through mat drills and summer drills and, you know, being there in Maymester and working out and all the 2-a-day practices and everything during camp, and just seeing it all culminate in that moment and being so close, but not getting it. I to this day, that was the most heart and gut wrenching game I ever been a part of. And I think I sat on my shoulder pads and my whole uniform for like an hour after the game because I just couldn't believe that it was over.
The margins are just so thin. I mean,
yeah.
that team could have been a national championship team, just like Alabama was.
Exactly. Very much so. You're right. It's a game of inches, and that was a defining moment in an exhibit A of that idea that it is a game of inches. Every inch matters.
Well, and then the next year you had the prayer at Jordan Hare, so you know you didn't have as much on the line, but I mean just in terms of heartbreak.
Yeah, that game was very special too. I remember a lot about that one. I won't bore you with the specifics, but I do recall us kind of being on the sideline, us as an offensive line unit, basically celebrating like, oh yeah, you know, this was a great win, a great comeback. Like we did it. We were able to wrap this thing up here in Auburn. And, you know, me being a Troup County guy, I hated Auburn growing up. So, you know, it felt good to be able to win that game in their stadium. But lo and behold, I'll never forget. I was like, well, guys, you know, it looks like the game's over, but let's just watch this last play before we actually start celebrating. And I remember it being dead silent when the ball's up in the air. And I remember thinking in my head, oh, that's definitely short. No way that they're going to catch this ball. And then all of a sudden it gets tipped and it gets new life, and the receiver runs under it and he's off to the races to the end zone. And I'll never forget, you know, none of us actually responding or reacting. We just kind of looked at each other, didn't say a word, put our helmet on, and was like, well, we got 8 seconds left, so I guess we can try to make something happen. But that one was pretty crazy as well. I think that year they just had some kind of mojo that no one can really explain. Because right after that, the next week, they obviously had that crazy play against Alabama too. So.
Yeah, that team, if they would have won a national championship, that would have been one of the craziest stories ever.
For sure.
But Kelvin Benjamin snagged it from them from
Yeah.
Florida State. I've already kept you longer than I told you I would, so let me run through some quick hitters here, some rapid fire. The toughest UGA defender that you had to block in practice?
Geno Atkins, by far, not even close.
That dude's made some money, too.
Yes, he did, and it's for good reason. I mean, I would say my freshman year, at any time, on any play, if he wanted to just toss me aside and make the play, he could have. But I think he just didn't want to embarrass me every day because I tried to be a pretty nice guy to him. And Geno was a nice guy himself. But by far, Geno was the most difficult guy to block my entire time at Georgia.
Toughest opponent to block, individual player?
Man, it's crazy. It's actually, with all the NFL guys that I wound up blocking, this guy probably had the shortest NFL career, and it's Jarrell Worthy. And he played for Michigan State. And we played against them in the Outback Bowl in Tampa. And, man, this was my redshirt sophomore year, and he ate my lunch the entire game. The only thing I remember thinking probably halfway through the game was, man, thank God this is a bowl game and we're not watching this film, because he is taking me to the woodshed every single play. And I knew that he had my number because normally my arms are pretty long for my size, and if I get my arms extended, a D lineman typically can't get his arms into my chest as well. But I remember I locked out. I had him exactly where I wanted him, and he just put his hands dead in my chest and pushed me back into the quarterback. And I was like, wow. Well, it's going to be a long rest of the day for me. I just hope I can get out of here without giving up too many big plays. So he was definitely the best that I played against in all of my games that I played at Georgia.
And in one sentence, how do you best describe what it feels like to deliver a pancake block?
Oh, man, wow, that's actually a great question. Let me think of the best way to describe that.
That's why I went to journalism school.
Yeah, man, wow, that's incredible. I've never heard that question before. Let's see.
And I ask because there's so many people out there, whether they're football players or not, that will never have that kind of experience, because so few are offensive linemen, and then so few are talented offensive linemen.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're exactly right. It's really an indescribable feeling of just pure dominance. It's one of those moments where you feel like, yeah, I could, basically, if we were to get in a fight and me and this guy, mano a mano, were to get in a fight, that's after I could handle them. So it's one of those kind of like macho, like almost primalistic type feelings to deliver a pancake block. But, man, it's definitely one of the better feelings that you can have, period, in football or in life in general.
Which of your teammates ran their mouth most in practice?
Oh, man, that is a great question, too. Let's see. Who ran their mouth the most? I would say of the D linemen that I faced, it was probably either Garrison Smith or Michael Thornton. And I think most of that was attributed because we were good friends, and they would always try to throw me off, making jokes or talking about my knees being bad and all this other kind of stuff. They definitely talked a lot. And I would say overall, man, that was a great question. It had to be somebody in the secondary. Had to be somebody in the secondary when it comes to just talking the most overall. Because those D-backs, that's all they do is talk.
It's always D-backs or wide receivers. They just talk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you have a funny story from a huddle? Like something that someone said in a huddle or something crazy?
Let's see. From a huddle, I would say this was actually hilarious, but it was actually a practice huddle, which makes it not as special. But we were in a huddle together, and this was Gurley's season where he was just, tearing it up, incredible. And actually, it was my senior year, and I had just been voted SEC Lineman of the Week. It was after we had played Tennessee, and the play before, we ran like a horn play and a sweep or something, and I made a dumb mistake and didn't get done what I needed to get done. And we kind of came back to to the huddle, and Coach Bobo, just which he never does, runs up to the huddle like all aggressive and gets in my face, and he's like, "Look, I don't care what award you just got, you have not arrived." He's like, "The only person that's arrived here is number 3." And Gurley, and everybody looks over at Gurley, and he's like, "Yeah, you're right, Coach." And everybody just dies laughing, because not only was it funny the way he reacted, but it was like, man, he's actually kind of right. Like, there's nobody else out here who can kind of just put on his pads, strap up his shoes without really stretching or doing anything, and be good to go and dominate. So it was definitely a funny moment for sure.
Man, the talent at running back and then offensive, it's just crazy how much those offenses had. I'll wrap with this so you can go spend some time with your wife after work. Just the current UGA team, Kirby Smart's era, the current offensive line is just loaded with talent. What's your opinion on what Georgia's doing right now?
It is incredible the way that they've been recruiting. Like, I think that winning starts with players, obviously, and it starts with talent. And I don't know if there's a team in the country that has more players and more talent than Georgia does right now. I think when it comes to this upcoming season, the sky's the limit. Like, I would honestly be surprised if we're not back in Atlanta competing for the SEC championship and competing to win it all again, just because our biggest strength, and I think the biggest important thing to making it far in football in general, is having the guys in the trenches. And I don't know if there's any, let alone linemen, I don't know if there's a better player in the country right now than Andrew Thomas. Like, he is on a different level. Like, he reminds me of Cordy Glenn significantly when it comes to just a talent and ability to do things that most other guys just can't do. And across the board, I mean, Solomon Kinley, both of those guys are probably the best 1-2 punch of linemen that I've seen in Georgia's history since maybe Ben Jones and Cordy Glenn. And then on top of that, you got Big Ben Cleveland playing in my old position. And, that guy is like a mountain. I remember I was training to try to go to the NFL and get ready for pro day. And he was like 16 years old training at the same place. And he was the guy who looked like he should have been going to the NFL, and I looked like the guy coming to out of high school. So it's the amount of size, and not just sheer size and athleticism, but just the intelligence that those guys have up there, I think is just going to set the tone, and they'll be the bell cows for them the entire season. And keep in mind, you have an incredibly smart quarterback, and Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift and all the other weapons that they have offensively and defensively, especially in the secondary. Like, the sky's the limit. The coaching's incredible, with Coley and, with all the other D coordinators and the other, defensive and offensive position coaches, and Kirby just kind of leading the way. Like, I would be very shocked if I don't see them, competing for a national championship, by the time the year's up.
Well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time. This was such a joy to chat with you and hear some of these stories, and I can tell there are plenty more in there, so we'll have to reconnect another time.
Definitely. I appreciate you taking the time, to invite me and ask me to join, because it's definitely a pleasure. I always, like you said, get joy out of, reliving some of those moments in the glory days. So thank you for adding a little light to my day, for sure.
Big thanks to Chris Burnette for joining us here on the Dog Days podcast. If you're a former player and you'd like to join us to tell some of your stories, especially the funny things, that's what our fans really rave about hearing. Maybe some recruiting stories as well. Hit me up on Twitter at Dayne Young. That's DayneYoung. And coming up on our next edition of the Dog Days podcast, we will have one of the SEC's all-time prolific playmakers. That's all I'm going to tell you for now, but I'm really excited about what's coming up next. Thank you for your support. Be sure to sign up and join the entire Bulldog community on UGAsports.com. It is a great place to be. See you next time.